Alexis, aka the Sloth Reader, and I'm here today to do my top books of 2017 video. This was a surprisingly hard list to narrow down because I feel like I read so many books this year that I absolutely loved. So like the order of this isn't necessarily 100% set. Don't quote me on the order, but these are all books that I really enjoyed this year and that for one reason or another really stayed with me. So I'll go ahead and get into it. The first book I'm going to mention is Far from the Tree by Robin Binway. Obviously this was the National Book Award winner for the Young Adult category, and I absolutely loved this book. This book was funny and endearing and emotional, and it dealt with a lot of topics in a really beautiful way, and I really strongly connected to all three of our main characters in this story, even though they were all dealing with different varieties of things that I necessarily hadn't dealt with. I still think Robin Binway did such an incredible job portraying these issues, and I just really loved this story, and I think that this is a story that so many people are going to be able to take something from, and those reasons are why it definitely makes this list. The next book I'm going to mention is Dreadnought by April Daniels, which is about our main character Danny, who is a trans female superhero, and I just really loved this story. This story made me feel so many different emotions, and the main character, Danny, is one of my favorite main characters of all time. I had so many feelings about her. I wanted to protect her and I just wanted her to be happy. Plus, I also just loved that the story is a trans narrative, but it's also a superhero narrative, and I felt like those two stories blended so well. I don't feel like there was ever a time when one of the stories was a hindrance on the other, and I just think it was a really successful book. The next book I'm going to mention is Noteworthy by Riley Redgate. This is a perfect, beautiful love child between She's the Man and Pitch Perfect, and it basically takes the two best things about those movies and it puts it into one hilariously diverse book. Our main character, Jordan, is Chinese American. She's also bisexual. Her father is disabled, and I love that all of those make an appearance in this book, as well as some other diverse characters who also make an appearance, and I just felt like this book blended all of those things so well together. And I like that, you know, Jordan, our main character, could be Chinese American, she could be poor, she could be bisexual, and it never took away from how genuine and fun and entertaining the a cappella part of the story really was. So this is definitely one I highly recommend to people. It was such an enjoyable read, and I just really liked it. The next one I'm going to mention is Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. I just had to put this book on this list because of it being my introduction to the Grishaverse by Leigh Bardugo, and technically to Leigh Bardugo as an author as well. I just love this world. It's by far my favorite part of this story, and I absolutely loved getting to be introduced to Ravka and Alina and the Darkling and all of these characters and this world that I'm so fascinated and intrigued by, and I just really had such a great time reading this book, so it's definitely why it makes it on this list. The next one I'm going to mention is Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. I actually read this book twice this year and enjoyed it even more the second time, but this is just such a magical little book, and there's so many things I love about this story. I really love the unique characters, I really love the diverse elements in the story. I like that we get just a little bit of a glimpse of all of the magical worlds that exist, and I personally love that Seanan McGuire left so much to the imagination when it comes to these magical worlds, because it literally allowed the reader to supplement whatever they wanted into these worlds, and I really loved that. And again, I really loved the mystery aspect, and I loved the characters so much. They're definitely what makes this book for me. This is just such a magical little book, and I will forever and always hold it in my heart. The next one I'm going to mention is To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han. I actually read this entire trilogy this year and absolutely loved it. But the first book is still my favorite because this first book has so many parts of it that I just really love. I love the fake boyfriend trope. I love the mystery of figuring out who Laura Jean sent her letters to. I also just really love Laura Jean herself. I think she's a very realistic character in that she feels like a teenager to me, But I also love that never in this series do we ever see Lara Jean compromise her morals or her stance on things. You know, even when her friends and everything are telling her she should behave one way, we really see Lara Jean stick to her guns, and she just decides to be herself. And that's one thing I truly, truly love about her. I also love a lot of the other characters in this book, Peter Kavensky, Lara Jean's sister Kitty, and I love that we get to see a book with a main character who is Korean American and has a very strong connection to her Korean heritage. If you want to read a book with really beautiful descriptions of baking and food, definitely pick this one up because that is it to a T. The next book I'm going to mention is The Diviners by Libba Bray, the first book in the Diviner series. This book was everything I could have possibly asked it to be. It was dark and creepy and filled with supernatural and the occult. It also followed a diverse group of characters who all felt so unique and realistic. And I just absolutely fell in love with it. Obviously, the setting plays such a big part in the story, but in such a subtle way. And I loved all of the characters and how they felt so authentic to the time period and how the writing felt authentic to the time period. I also just found the plot incredibly entertaining. I found the characters funny and endearing. And I just love the kids with superpowers trope, but I also just love books that are a little weird and macabre, and this book was just all of those things so perfectly put together, and I just fell in love with the series, and I cannot wait to continue on because so good. The next book I'm going to mention is Champion by Marie Lu. This is the final book in the Legend trilogy, which I obviously finished up this year, and I have so many feelings about the Legend trilogy in general, but I thought Champion was such a wonderful conclusion. I loved watching June and Day's characters in this series really grow and how that growth led them to the finale, and I loved seeing different aspects of the story and the world come together in this final book. And I just love Marie Lu's writing so much. I love how she writes her characters and how she crafts a world, and it's just such a sad but enjoyable journey reading the Legend trilogy, and I just absolutely love it. It is by far my favorite YA dystopian series I have read. I feel very, very passionate and emotional about the characters and the story and the plot, and I just loved this book so much. So the next two I'm going to mention are actually by the same author. And they are from two different series by this author, but I felt like I needed to mention both of them because of how much I loved both of them. So I'm going to talk about The Last Olympian, which is the final book in the Percy Jackson series, and The House of Hades, which is the fourth book in the Heroes of Olympus series by Riordan. I really loved these books for two very different reasons. I loved The Last Olympian because I think it's one of the best conclusions I've ever read to a series. This is a book that really delivers on all of the promises this series set up. There is a war that takes place in this final book, and we actually got to see a large majority of this story be about fighting and war and the different types of outcomes of war and the consequences, but we also still got to see the humor and those sweet character moments still put into this book. And I really, really just thought this was such a well-made conclusion, and I just really loved it, and I loved being able to see these characters that I had read, you know, about for 5 books, and I just love to see them come together in this book and how it ended, and I just thought it was so good. I absolutely loved The House of Hades. This was definitely my favorite book in the Heroes of Olympus series. So many feelings about this book. I loved the way this was written. This one is told in like an alternating storylines where there are 2 concurrent storylines that are taking place at the same time, and they're like culminating to a point. I really loved that this was the first book in this series where we really got to see some of the characters start to strongly develop. I loved the importance that my favorite character, Nico, played in this series. And I want to talk about how emotional I feel about this book. There's a character in the series who comes out as being gay, and the way that that is handled, it's not a smooth story, and I really liked that. I think it's something that could have been more nuanced had it been written by a queer author, but I appreciate what this book must be like in the hands of a 14-year-old boy reading this story and getting to see themselves in a character. And I also just really, really related to the commentary of this character and what they were going through and the struggles they dealt with. And I just have such an emotional attachment to this book for how much I loved it and how much it means to me. So coming down to my 3 favorite books of the year, the third one I'm going to mention is A Conjuring of Light by V.E. Schwab, to absolutely no one's surprise. This is the third and final book in the Shades of Magic trilogy. I absolutely loved getting to see more of certain characters and getting to see their backstories and their motivations. I absolutely adored that. I really, really liked how much this book expanded on certain parts of the world. I really loved getting to see my favorite characters fight and fall, and it was just such a good and enjoyable conclusion. It made me, no kidding, the last like 100 pages was literally just me crying. Different types of like sad tears, happy tears, like tears because it's over. It was just literally me crying for like the last 100 pages. I personally couldn't have imagined a better ending for this series. I think it ended the best way it could have, and all of the characters got the best endings they could have. I just cannot wait for more books in this world. Number 2, I think, is a book that is going to be on a lot of people's favorite books of the year, and for me that is The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. I absolutely loved our main character Star. I loved her friends. I especially loved her family. Her family is one of my favorite families in like all of literature now because of how much I absolutely loved her family. I found this story very emotionally charged. It was funny, it was sad, it was frustrating, it made me angry. I obviously absolutely love all of the social commentary in this book. As a white reader and reviewer, this book made me so aware of privileges that I didn't even realize that I had. And I definitely think that that was Angie Thomas's intention, and I fully appreciate and respect her and this book for making me aware of those things, even when it was stuff that I wouldn't have even thought about. And I just think that this is such an important book, and I think that in certain hands this book could be life-changing, game-changing, and I'm just so excited that Angie Thomas decided to bless us with this book because it really is such a wonderful, wonderful read. And here we are, time for me to finally announce my favorite book of 2017. And honestly, I would be surprised if you guys didn't guess it because I feel like I gushed about this book every chance I possibly could. It's my favorite book of the year. It's one of my favorite books of all time. It's a book I fully intend to reread many times in the future, and that is The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie Lee. This book was so much fun. That is the best way I can explain. There were so many parts of this book where I was laughing out loud, where I was frustrated with our main character Monty for doing the things that he did, but I still never disliked him. I still found his character and his character growth very endearing. I absolutely love that Monty is bisexual, and I love that we get to see him express interest in both women and men in the story. I love the commentary that the story makes on a lot of aspects as it is set in the 1700s. The other diverse elements we got in this book, there's a character who has epilepsy. I really, really loved how epilepsy was talked about in this book. It's something I personally have studied in a historical context, and I feel like Mackenzie Lee really delivered on it being a truthful portrayal of how epilepsy was viewed in the 1700s. I loved Percy as a character. I loved Monty's sister Felicity. I loved the ridiculous and scandalous situations our characters got themselves into and how they got themselves out. I just loved this book on every level. There was never a moment in the story where I was bored. I just really loved this book, and I loved the characters and the plot and the writing and how it all tied up into this fun little 1700s adventure story, and I just honestly cannot recommend this book enough. I read it back in July, and I pretty much spent the second half of the year going, nothing I read could possibly trump how much I loved this book. So, I am awarding it my favorite book of 2017, The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie Lee. Alrighty guys, so those are my favorite books of the year. I would absolutely love to know what you guys' favorite books of 2017 are, or if you have a video you've already made or a blog post, feel free to link it down below. I'd love to check it out. If you like what I do, I post videos on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and I would absolutely love it if you guys subscribed, and I'll see you guys soon with another video. Bye!